What exact year did FNAF VR and Security Breach happen? Solved. When did the therapy tapes take place? Solved. Who wrote the post-it notes and the wall code? Solved. The years, the dates, the details we've needed, all finally provided to us with a new book Nexie, containing a story called The Mimic. That's right, a single story that is single-handedly the most important story in this entire franchise so far. The origin story of our new villain that gives us explanations for a lot of details, past and present. This story is so important to the lore that I really recommend you don't skip this recap. So this is your spoiler warning if you want to wait for the book's official release, or read the live reads over on the Reddit Discord yourself. And here's a quick summary of The Mimic. Within this story that begins in early March, we're reintroduced to Edward Murray, in an earlier time, who has a son named David, who carries around a tiger plush, and had a wife named Fiona who unfortunately died giving birth. We learn that Edwin is the creator of Mr. Hugs, by proxy probably the rest of the Trash Gang too, and is working on repairing a Chica head, which turns out to be the 18th character that he's worked on for Fazbear's. Speaking of, he was bought out by Fazbear Enterprises, a subsidiary to Fazbear Entertainment, which is the parent company, after signing a 12-page contract given by its executive. Continuing with the story, and Edwin thinks about the concept of mimicking while thinking of ways to keep his son entertained. So he puts the two ideas together to create a mimicking friend for David that goes from spark to completion in no time. He builds the legless endoskeleton and goes on to steal hardware from these abandoned projects and writes the code for the machine using Pascal and C. And after just 22 days, it was ready to test. And with David, they agree on the name Mimic. Edwin reaches behind Mimic's neck and activates it. David hugs the tiger and it immediately mimics this motion, just with an invisible tiger. David puts out a finger and touches Mimic's chest, then Mimic puts out a finger and touches David's chest. Throughout the next few weeks, Edwin feels the best he's felt in a long time, and David starts developing a sign language of sorts to communicate with Mimic, who can't speak. While Edwin works on Chica's repairs and Foxy's programming, David and Mimic create a makeshift tiger for Mimic, since it always has its arm curved like it's holding Tiger, because David was always holding it. The two colour with crayons, play catch with a red rubber ball, and hide in costumes sent by Fazbear's. A yellow dog that we've read about in a previous epilogue, and a green alligator. This makes both dirty, and Edwin yells at them both, and he later yells at David again, who interrupts the soldering job. Over time, Edwin tinkers with Mimic's programming, making its movements more fluid and giving it general improvements. One morning, Edwin wakes up to David wanting to play catch, who goes downstairs to go and wait for him to wake up properly. Edwin calls him for breakfast, but he doesn't answer, so he goes downstairs and sees the factory doors wide open. Edwin rushes outside and sees his joyful son's tunnel vision focus on catching the red ball that's bouncing away, unaware that he's running directly onto a highway. The next 2 weeks go by and Edwin gets more and more depressed, eventually working on an endoskeleton for Bonnie, which is when Mimic climbs onto the table with its tiger and acts out David's motion for wanting ice cream. Edwin snaps and destroys the Mimic with his fury, unknowingly giving it his agony, directly quoted with, "He could almost feel his murderous thoughts pouring through his muscles and transfusing through the metal into Mimic systems." And here's when we have a time skip to January, where Dominic, Harry and Glenn enter the factory, after Edwin's gone missing months ago after breaching their contract, with vague instructions by Fazbear's on cleaning the place up. While looking around, they smell something weird and find a tape player in a similar satchel to their own that explains what Team A, the first team to do this job, was doing, including giving the Mimic legs from the other animatronics, which is how Mimic transitions from Model 1 to Model 2. They eventually find the smelly dead bodies of Team A. Then while switching costumes over and over, Mimic kills the rest of them, brutally, ending the story. Moving on to the epilogue of the book, which is following the integration of Mimic at FNAF 6's location during the construction of the Pizzaplex, and we learned that there was a line of Mimic robots all connected to the Mimic 1 program, as a hive mind of sorts, that they wanted to use to monitor animatronic show routines and movements to replicate their actions, and they could all fit into any costume easily. This is an answer to Help Wanted and beginning of the Glitchtrap virus. They scan the Mimic circuit boards when making the game, which is why this description of monitoring the animatronic routines and replicating them is so similar to Hand Unit and Tape Girl's explanations in Help Wanted. However, back to the new information, and we learn that one day the Mimic witnesses something comparable to hide and seek, and mimics that to this day in the epilogues, even trying to lure the protagonist of the epilogues into safe rooms. That's right, the Mimic saw the missing children's incident we know far too well. This was its first information it gained about William, and in Help Wanted it began to take the actual form of Afton, once given all the information about the rumours and secrets of Fazbear's, therefore Afton's, past, and even seeing a reenactment of that day. There are a lot of connections made from this story that make us aware that this is Glitchtrap / Burntrap, including how Glitchtrap's only voice lines are mimicking Tape Girl's voice, and Tom even pointed out how it has the tears in its eyes and foam at the mouth like Edwin's pain is described, and that's doubled down in Princess Quest with it seemingly crying. Burntrap's arm is constantly in the position that it would have had in the story while David was holding the tiger plush, hence why it wakes up in its first ever position it was in, and why its arm is constantly like that throughout the fight. We can also assume Mimic is reminded by Vanessa and Gregory of its past. It relates to Vanessa as she's been abused and manipulated by her father, much like how Edwin treated it, and Gregory even looks a lot like how David's described. As pointed out in the last video, there's also the Endo warehouse murals containing an endoskeleton with bunny ears representing the Mimic, with Vanny on its side. We even do things in Security Breach to the Rockstars that are references to its past too, since it was legless at one point, couldn't ever speak, and had its head damaged severely and changed many times. Not only that, but during an interview with Stillwell Studios, they gave us a hint for Security Breach that was literally just schematics, yet there's nothing in the game even similar to one. However, in the epilogues we hear about a manual for the Mimic, the true villain of Security Breach. Also, in the character encyclopedia, Burntrap's name isn't its canon name, but why not make it that unless its true name has already been decided? Like Mimic perhaps? There are just so many things that point to the Mimic always being the plan for this story from the start, and that this isn't just a retcon after seeing the community's backlash to Burntrap. This was always the plan. So now that we know that the Mimic Line's circuit board / the Mimic 1 program is directly what creates the Glitchtrap virus, and Burntrap itself is the original Mimic endoskeleton powered by Edwin's incredibly strong and large amount of agony, with this story's information, and from the other stories too, I'm extremely glad to say that now we can make a timeline of specifically this new story of FNAF, with exact dates to almost everything. Although bookwise, I should make it clear that this timeline will only include the Mimic, Storyteller, and GGY placements, as they are the only real ones that push the game story forward. Either way, let's begin. March 1984. The first part of the Mimic story takes place. We know this takes place early due to 24-year-old Edwin reflecting on the early 70s as his past, but also that Edwin is only working on the Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy costumes, fixing them up and working on their programming, which would only be for the first Freddy's location because they are left abandoned at the other locations, and not finished repair until FNAF 1. So if this story takes place around the 1987's location, then where the Chica, for example, should have a fixed head since Edwin finishes it. Not only that, but the MCI itself happens when Fazbear's has Mimic, which if the story takes place any later than 1984, even just the next year 1985 for example, the time skip to January when they don't have the Mimic would be later than the missing children's incident, which takes place around June. This date also makes sense with Edwin being with Fazbear's for about a year and a half at this point, which would be late 1982 in this case, possibly in preparation for the first Freddys to open the next year in 1983. January 1985, the second part of the Mimic story takes place, where Fazbear's is sending teams to clean up the Mimic. Eventually, somehow they get the Mimic and create a new line of Mimics based off of it, all stored at Freddy's locations to observe the animatronics and are all connected to the Mimic 1 program. Around June, the Mimic witnesses the missing children's incident happening, and so eventually they start mimicking behavior they're not supposed to, and get deactivated from now on. Fast forward past most of the games, and in December of 2023, the FNAF 6 fire happens. Based off the game's release date, which would mean FNAF 3 happens in around March of that year, which works perfectly, this leads to Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated no longer existing. However, soon after the company dissolved, it's revived in 2024 into Fazbear Entertainment LLC. During this year, the Help Wanted story takes place, where Steve Snodgrass creates the 3 indie games for Fazbear Entertainment. Silver Parasol Games then begins working with Fazbear's to create FNAF VR Help Wanted. Meanwhile, someone, most likely just Fazbear's, takes the Mimic circuit boards and gets them scanned into the game. This speeds up the process of coding, as the animatronics are now perfectly replicating their previous performances. However, this also leads to the Mimic 1 program to learn all the information about William and create Glitchtrap. mimicking William with a form of the Spring Bonnie suit like it saw back in 1985. Glitchtrap then encounters playtester Jeremy, which causes him to cut his face off with a paper guillotine slicer, and creates a possible incoming lawsuit. Tape Girl then takes over playtesting, documenting her mission but failing to defeat Glitchtrap, leading to late May when FNAF VR releases, based on the game's release date, which sometime after, Fazbear's popularity starts growing again, as the Pizzaplex begins construction for its first layout. Near the beginning of the Pizzaplex's construction at the FNAF 6 location, the Mimic epilogues take place, where the construction team receives a shipment of new state-of-the-art animatronics, and while all the other animatronics were in mint condition, one of them is broken and discolored. It's the original Mimic. They get it to help with work by breaking the heads and arms of the animatronics, but when a worker goes to congratulate it, it continues its job and breaks off his arm too. From here on, the Mimic continues its carnage until a worker escapes and gets the Pizzaplex's only exit sealed off. A group of high schoolers eventually go and investigate the old pizzeria, noticing that the entrance was sealed up with concrete, but there is a vent opening in the roof that they can go through, and do. But after discovering the dead workers and trying to escape, they notice the chute they came out of is crushed. The Mimic then appears and begins its reign of terror in the rest of the epilogues that are still continuing. Meanwhile, the Dreadbear DLC update releases around Halloween, and the Christmas update by Christmas, which by the time of Christmas, the Pizzaplex construction has been going well, as we can see for ourselves. In 2025, it's finally time for year 1 of the Pizzaplex. The Storyteller, which I've recapped in a previous video, takes place here, where the Mimic 1 program begins controlling the Pizzaplex and the animatronics, as Edwin and the head of the company die. We know the Pizzaplex opens here due to the Storyteller taking place 40 years after the Mimic, supported by Edwin being 40 years older now, and the book outright saying that Edwin couldn't have imagined being here 40 years ago. For later reference, Mary Schneider is hired in the first year. The second year goes by in 2026 with nothing really happening, but sometime in 2027 or 2028, aka year 3 or 4 of the Pizzaplex, GGY takes place as Vanessa is continuing therapy with patient 46, Gregory, covering her tracks. We know this because Mary was working with Fazbear's for simply the last couple years, before disappearing 5 months before GGY. Raylan Lawrence lasts 1 month, disappearing 4 months before GGY, Trina Welch lasts 7 weeks after her, disappearing 3 to 2 months before GGY, and after that no one for a few weeks, but then we learn Georgie Lou is at 1 month during GGY. Sometime before Security Breach, we aren't sure yet. 1. Vanny seems to get Glamrock Freddy, who's possessed by someone, to pave the way through the sealed up entry and get to the Mimic, who wouldn't kill her since it's under its command, possibly allowing her to literally shape it into William by adding flesh and a tattered suit, most likely scrap traps. 2. Gregory is somehow freed from the virus, being clueless to everything in Security Breach. And 3. The Blob is either created or just forms itself. And then finally, in 2029, at year 4 and 3/4 of the Pizzaplex, Security Breach takes place. We know this due to the quarterly Pizzaplex magazines being at volume 19, equaling around 4.75 years. This also fits a calendar investigation done before any of these books were even out, by Lemmy Villeneuve, which states 2029 as the earliest possible date for Security Breach to take place. A few things that I know will be pointed out, namely FNAF AR and the AR emails. They really fit anywhere after Help Wanted and before Security Breach, although they most likely happened during GGY times, as the therapy tapes talk about Vanny's creation with its fur and the weird searches Vanessa is doing, just like the AR emails do. Secondly, the Stitch Wraith stingers, if you choose them to be canon, can take place anywhere post FNAF 6, since they all take place within a month or two. The other Tales from the Pizzaplex stories can also fit in the timeline too, although the books aren't finished yet and future books could always just end up giving us hints or directly tell us when the previous stories take place, so for now they're staying out of this timeline. Now we've talked about the timeline, there's still some things I want to talk about, like the post-it room and the wall code in Michael's room. I will pre-warn this section that I do admit not everything fits perfectly, but a lot does. And we'll talk about the problems in the next section. But first of all, let's talk about the post-it room. I briefly mentioned it in the summary, but when Edwin finally finishes Chica, he saw David and Mimic coloring using crayons. And although Mimic was clumsy with it, Edwin goes and joins in too, and the three of them draw and color together. This This got me immediately thinking about the post-it notes, and the pieces all fell into place. Take a look at the first set of notes. Binary coding that translates to "why is I," "you are my family," "I can feel it," things that don't make sense, clumsy squiggles, a house that leads somewhere. The second set of notes including basic words with simple things about partying, playing, friends, family. And the third set of notes are clear words, shades of colors, instructions, little things a parent would tell a child. Is it possible that these three are the ones who wrote the notes? Or it's at least about them? One major clue is that there's a lot of groups of three, describing the three as happy, showing 3 birthday presents, and the 3 people would be Edwin, David, and Mimic, who are mentioned to be drawing together. The Mimic could be remembering the house that leads to the freeway with the 3 friends, including David, who taught it about ice cream, Edwin, whose agony is powering it, and the Mimic itself, who has found a new home where only grown-ups were, before it tells the kids to leave, run, and hide to go play a game of hide and seek like it once saw. David draws the 3 of them having a party since, as a child, he'd want to party and play all the time, as well as eat and have snacks. But either way, he also draws about his family and his new friend Mimic, who's his gift. But he also draws the ball he follows right before dying, playing games before ice cream, and sharing food like he does with Mimic, and also his tiger plush, etc. Edwin, however, draws things that David can understand. Hello, goodbye, colors, stop, go, home, his friends are here. He even draws his wife, possibly even his work for Freddy's Pizzeria, which they'd probably have often. And yes, there are some problems, but as you can see, a lot of this works. For now though, let's move on to the wall code in Michael's room. Once again, not everything fits perfectly, and I'll talk about that in the next section. But interestingly enough, in the Mimic story, Edwin found construction paper that David and Mimic drew on, containing odd drawings surrounded by markings vaguely resembling hieroglyphics. And then in the storyteller, Mr. Burrows finds a sheet of paper covered in weird drawings and symbols by presumably Edwin that he didn't understand, including triangles within triangles. I personally think that this is telling us that Edwin may be the author behind the wall code. Hear me out. Break and mend, I built the breath. Edwin builds the Mimic, breaking it apart and giving it his agony. They hunt now, drawn to life. Mimic infects the animatronics, causing security breach. Not real, still keen. This could be about either the Mimic not being a real person, but it's working to become one, or possibly about how the Mimic says, "why is I?" It might actually think it's really alive due to Edwin's agony, but it's not. And frit and fraught with thought and zest. Edwin is frightened yet interested about what's going to happen now it's returned. And jest no blunt woes. Mimic's story is literally filled with sorrow, agony. From here though, it seems to go from talking about the Mimic to talking about us. Dodge, duck, flash, shoot, crawl, run, crush the vile band, describing what we do to beat it, describing the gameplay including crushing the literal vile band. Cry not, try not, do not hold out hope. He isn't confident that the Mimic will be stopped. Your life, your aim will save those with soul. Our aim in Security Breach and beating Afton is to save those with soul, whether it be freeing Vanessa or possibly helping the Blob. Some of these could be worked on and improved a little bit, I admit, but for now this is what I think the wall code is truly about, telling us about the Mimic but then what we need to do. This, however, leads to my overall problems with these two things. First of all though, let's talk specifically about the problems with the post-it room. The Mimic's part honestly works fine, but David's shares the biggest problem, which is that it shows a guard, which doesn't make too much sense. Unless we assume that all the post-its are written by Mimic, and that this is representing the workers with flashlights that it kills in the story. But either way, it also talks about a party we don't ever hear about, although I can offer a possible solution, which is that David's just a child, and so parties and playing is always on his mind. The other problem is that it also shows multiple friends despite there only being one Mimic when he's alive, which again, a possible solution is that Edwin might have been telling David that he'll get a lot more friends in kindergarten, which we do know he was going to start the next year. Edwin's part is also good and clear, especially since he's the only one to draw a woman, which would represent his late wife, that neither Mimic or David got to see. But there's one problem with Edwin's part, which is that it says it's all for him, which doesn't make much sense considering everything he did was for David and not selfishly. And with the wall code, however, the only part that sticks out as a problem to me is the random shift in perspective and time, describing the Mimic's backstory and what it's done, but then switching to talk to us or about us, which would be Gregory in this case. But this leads to my main problems with these puzzles in general. The story itself seems to think it's important enough to tell us they're drawing with crayons, and that there's this code that the Mimic and Edwin know, and despite a few issues, a lot seems to align and fit together, besides literacy, importance, and timing. Are these literal and in-universe things, just for the audience or a mix of both? The Wall-Code shows that the most, with it talking about a situation it's caused, but then switching to talking about gameplay which it couldn't possibly know or predict in-universe. Also, if it's in-universe, what's the timing of these things being written? Is it literally when the three draw with crayons, or when Edwin writes seemingly random stuff? Or somehow during Security Breach? Most importantly of all, are these actually lore important things? Or just fun Easter eggs and references telling us that hey, the Mimic is connected to the game story, so pay attention to it? These questions have been raised with other attempts to solve these two things, as there is always one or two small things that don't fit while literally everything else does. It seems like the answers are right there, so many things add up. More than usual. The books are outright telling us, here it is, but it feels like we're still missing something. Or maybe we're just misinterpreting these puzzles and they are simply just Easter eggs and references. So if you have any thoughts or opinions or even solutions, please feel free to leave a comment below, as there's obviously still a whole lot of room for discussion here. But finally, the Blob. This is something I haven't talked about much on my channel at all, and that's just because what is this thing? Since we first got it, I personally assumed it was the Funtime Service animatronics from FNAF AR that they just had down there for some reason, or that it's made from the stolen objects from Rockstar Row, since there are missing items in some of the display cases. Either way, it's a really weird pick and choosing of characters and their possible importance in the Blob. Although, I do think Rytos has a possible answer to the Blob, that the remains of the storyteller are the Blob itself, but also contains some remnant or agony of some kind from some of the missing children. Which, to back that theory, I think it's interesting that only the animatronics directly attached to one of the two MCIs have their lights on, while the puppet, who'd be Charlie, and Baby, who'd be Elizabeth, have their lights off. I recommend giving Rytos' video a watch for a better explanation, but keeping in mind that by now with these new stories, it seems like these books are directly in the game's timeline, which he originally disagreed with, and maybe he still does. But before we finish up today, I do want to talk about the books. I understand the frustration that people have with now needing these books and our new villain's origin story being revealed and told there. But we're at a point now where yes, we need them. As much as I and everyone else would have wanted more to be shown or hinted at in the games about all of this stuff, it was proven that this was their plan all along. Considering we got a leaked ruin teaser with a hackery device and the date 4/6, after the book that revealed the hacker Patient 46 came out. It seems like they're getting more and more necessary, which if you don't have the time nor want to buy these books for whatever reason, there are people like Ozone who make audiobooks for these stories right here on YouTube, or there are summaries in the FNAF fandom wikis. I do recommend that you check these books out though, because some of them are really good, especially this one. Either way, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next week. Bye!